Welcome to the Josh Hall Web Design Show. Helping you build better websites and create a web design business that gives you freedom and a lifestyle you love.
Hey friends, welcome into the podcast. This is episode 148, and I've got a fun and special episode coming up for you here because in this one, I had the opportunity to interview James Giroux, who is the Community Experience Manager with Gravity Forms. Gravity Forms, if you're new to WordPress or the web design game, is an incredible form builder. It is the form builder that I have used since, I think, 2013. I've been using it for a very long time. I love Gravity Forms. I still use them. And what's really cool, recently, Gravity Forms decided to, quote, and you'll hear about this with James here, humanize their brand. And this is really, really important. I'm actually going to be talking about this more coming up, the importance of humanizing your brand and putting a face to your business so it doesn't look like, well, something that's a robot or something that's too corporate-y. There's so much power in this. Now, it's a lot different when you're a freelancer and you have your image on your website than a company like Gravity Forms, who has a team of remote workers all over the world. So the cool thing about this is that Gravity Forms hired James to come in and start a podcast and video show called Input. And I was actually privileged to recently be on Input on episode 5. So after that call, I had such a great time talking with James. I said, hey man, would you like to come on my show? And I'm personally really curious and interested in Gravity Forms and their approach about this idea of humanizing their brand and adding some personality to it. So what we do in this episode is essentially talk about the content strategy that Gravity had Forms with creating this new show for their brand and what they're doing with Gravity Forms to separate themselves from their competition. I found this chat to be completely and utterly fascinating. I love hearing about strategies like this for particularly bigger companies. Elegant Themes, because I'm a user of Divi, I've always been fascinated with how they've kind of added a human touch to their brand, and it's one reason I've stuck with Divi and remained with Elegant Themes as my primary theme, or Divi as my theme. And Gravity Forms is up to the same thing. So it was really cool hearing from James on what their strategy is and how they're going about interviews and community and engagement and doing this podcast to increase awareness about their brand, but also to learn and to really make some really good connections. So I think you're going to find this fascinating as well. Should go without saying that if you are interested in doing some sort of interview series or podcast for your company, your business, I highly recommend it. It really is such an amazing opportunity. And this episode will give you a lot of confidence and help you empower to do that if you're interested. Now, one thing that is really going to help your business, completely unrelated to doing an interview series, is building recurring income. And if you didn't know, I have a website maintenance plan course, and the new version of this course, version 2.0, is out now. I'm so excited about the new version of this course. I think it's the best work I've ever done, quite personally, for a course. So I'm really, really excited to help you build recurring income by creating a hosting and maintenance plan. If you have not yet signed up for the course and you are ready and you are like, okay, I've got to get some stable income coming in, join my website maintenance plan course today. You can go to the show notes for this episode at joshhall.co/148. There'll be a link there to my maintenance plan course. I would love to welcome you in and help you either build your plan from the ground up or take your current plan to the next level. Just a reminder, if you are a current student, you don't pay another dime. You have lifetime access to all the courses you enroll in. So all you need to do is log in and you can go through all the new lessons and new content. And again, I'm really excited to help you build a recurring income maintenance plan. For right now though, guys, enjoy this episode with James from Gravity Forms. James, welcome onto the podcast, man. So great to have you on.
Good. So glad to be here. This is awesome. Thank you for having me.
We were just talking about, before we went live here, you've been up, we're recording at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, but you've been up since 5 a.m. You've had a long day because it's actually the kickoff of Gravity Forms' kind of new initiative to engage their audience, and it's called Input. And I'm really excited to have you on because you are the host of this show called Input, which is a video and podcast audio show. By the time this episode comes out, I will have been on, so I was really excited to have you on my show to kind of talk about this and to talk about this idea of how to create content with whatever that content looks like to help build community and engagement to eventually sell a product or a service. Because I know I have a lot of students that are interested in this, and we're all not Gravity Forms, like a huge plugin in the market, but no matter what it is, I'm sure the same principles apply. So all that to say, super excited to have you on, James. Do you want to start off with just letting everybody know first where you're based out of and what do you do as the host of Input?
Sure. Yeah. So I am based out of Kingston, Ontario, Canada. So it's sort of the halfway point between the capital of Canada, which is Ottawa, and the capital of Ontario, which is Toronto, the largest city in Canada. So about halfway between each. And that's on the eastern side.
I was just going to
time
ask.
zone.
Yeah, I was wondering if you were Eastern New York time or if you were Central, which would be like Chicago.
New York time for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And when somebody, they hear about your role with Input, what do you tell them? I know you are, I guess your official title is Community Experience Manager, right?
That's right.
Yeah. What do you say you do though?
Well, when people ask me, it's a great question. And I think it's one of the things that most excited me about when, it was the thing that most excited me when I got offered the job here was, they said, we want you to come in and humanize the brand. So we want you to come in and help us, put some faces to who we are and what we do here at Gravity Forms, because for many, many years, we've been an iconic product, an iconic plugin for many WordPress professionals, but nobody's really known who we are as a team or our culture, our values, and what it means for us. So that was a big part of what drew me to Gravity Forms and what drew me to this role was this opportunity to sort of imagine for a company that's as iconic as Gravity Forms to think, well, how do you humanize a brand like that? How do you rebuild or establish that connection between product and community? So that's a big part of what I do. And then the other side of my role is on the marketing side is coordinating and connecting with our community of third-party add-on developers as well.
Okay. Fascinating, man. Well, again, I love it. We talked when you interviewed me for the Input show. I told you that I've been a Gravity Forms user since I think 2013 is when I started using it. So I was, I guess not an early adopter, but I definitely used it more of it in its infancy. And I've seen it, go through all sorts of innovations and versions. And I still use it today. It's my main contact form. It's the main contact form that my agency uses. So to hear that they want to humanize the brand and add more personality and community to it, of course, that fires me up because that's what I'm 100% about. I didn't know who was behind Gravity Forms until you released the first episode with the founders, which, funny enough, we're recording this on the day of the launch, which is why you're so tired.
That's right.
So I did catch most of the episode. And, man, it's just so cool. It's just so freaking cool to hear from the people who are behind it, because when you think of Gravity Forms, I don't know what everyone who is listening is thinking, but if you're a user, you might wonder, is this like one developer in a basement, or is this like an agency of 75 people that is in San Francisco, or are they scattered abroad? Who knows? So I think it's so valuable to do that, to add that personality. So really, really excited to see what this, ends up becoming. I'm actually curious, before we dive into, the reason they wanted to do this and the strategy behind it, what is your background and how did they end up getting in touch with you? How did this opportunity come about for you, James?
Oh, well, I have been in the WordPress ecosystem for about 10 years and started out running my own agency, doing websites and things. I actually was a brand designer or a logo designer. That was sort of my first kick at things. I was like, I want to get out there and, do logos for people. But I launched my freelance business right around the time 99 Designs kicked off. Okay. And so instead of getting those rich, brand contracts that I was hoping for, all of a sudden I was competing against these marketplaces that were doing it really well. And so it became almost a bit of necessity to get into WordPress, right? And to get into website design. And I'd been doing it for a few years before that in some of the jobs that I did. But in 2012, I went full time and really sort of decided to go for it and do the agency thing and the freelance thing. And from there, after a couple of years of doing that and working with a couple of different communities in the theme space, I went to Pressnomics, which is an event in the WordPress ecosystem. Many people may know, and met some people from Envato there, and ended up, just through seeing tweets going back and forth from some people, hearing about a job to become the WordPress evangelist at Envato. So that was really when I went from a bit of an unknown or anonymous WordPress user to somebody with a bit more profile, and got to travel around the world, going to conferences for WordPress. We created a number of our own conferences internally, really working with independent business owners, independent creators across a wide variety of industries, video, audio, photography, all those different kind of creative industries. And just, really hearing their stories, celebrating their successes, navigating, being, the representative of Envato, a marketplace environment, to a bunch of independent creators. It's kind of another way to look at that is very similar to how app developers view the App Store. So you can imagine it.
I remember
sometimes it's a little, sometimes a little tricky to navigate.
My gosh. Yeah. I remember being a user of it, for the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, from there, after, working with Envato for a number of years, funnily enough, the same person that actually, was in the Twitter conversation about, the job at Envato sent me a link to the job posting for, Gravity Forms. They were looking for somebody to kind of come in and they were looking for a video first person, somebody to come in and do video. Okay. Because they had decided from a content point of view that was a direction they wanted to go. And my background was in interactive multimedia and graphic design. So I'd done some video work in the past. And when I came in and sort of, at first I wasn't sure if this was the right role for me. I was, like all things, you sort of not really 100% sure until you meet people. But I went into my first interview. I can remember walking out of that interview and just being like, oh my goodness, it was like love at first sight kind of thing. Or like me and the hiring manager at the time, Mark, like he and I would just hit it off. Right. And it was just like, it was meant to be. I was just going to say, what was the love at first sight? Was it the role? Was it the feeling of the people, the company? Yeah. What gave you that feeling like this is a good fit? It was, I was working at Envato, and Envato is a great company, but there are a lot of competing priorities when you're working in a company that big. And one of the things that really intrigued me about Gravity Forms was that they had a similar community feel, in that they had a group of independent add-on creators who were out there doing the same kind of thing. So that was familiar territory for me. But again, it was this whole idea of like taking these bits that I was doing and I felt I was getting good at, like you sort of start to feel like you're becoming it's not just guesswork anymore, trying to figure out what to do, but like you could come into a situation and go, actually, I know how to solve that problem. I've done that before. So there's a bit of confidence there in that. But then it was balanced on this other side with this challenge to humanize the brand, to do video, to think about what we could do in that space to bring the culture and the values of Gravity Forms and Rocket Genius into the world of WordPress, and what would that look like, and what could we do?
That's awesome.
After one interview, I remember saying to my wife, I was like, this is it. I got to take, I can't not go here. So yeah, in a couple of weeks, the deal was done, and yeah.
Very cool, man. And maybe this would be a better question for them, but I'm curious if was there something that happened that made them realize this is a priority, or is this something they wanted to pursue as far as humanizing the brand?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I think Gravity Forms has been, it's been quite lucky in that its growth has matched WordPress's growth. So organically, it's been able to just grow at the same pace. And by delivering a great product and a great user experience and a solid foundation for professionals to be able to build on. They've just been able to grow by being good citizens in the community and good citizens in the wider ecosystem. But I think they hit a point in 2019 where they realized that their approach, and one of the things you'll see actually in the first episode, they'll talk a little bit about this, is that they never wanted to be the kind of company that was aggressively growing. And so it was, they didn't want to, build it up quick and then sell it off or anything like that. So they've always been kind of like low and slow, like good barbecue, right?
I love that. That's a great analogy. I want the tools that I use just to be like a nice barbecue, low and slow and take your time. Yeah.
That's it. And so they got to this point, I think, where they realized that approach or the slow nature of what they were doing was actually getting in the way of them being able to deliver on some of the promises and some of the things they wanted to do. And so they began to reach out and look for people to come in and do different things. And they had another person doing some community work and development work. And he actually decided he's an add-on developer. So he went off to go and do that. And so they had these two kind of things that they were hoping to find filled in two different people, a video person and a community person. And because of my background and my experience, I was able to come in and fill both of those in one shot.
Yeah.
And bring that experience alongside all of that. So I think that's sort of what sealed the deal for them.
Yeah.
With me.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it is funny. And the reason I'm really excited to see, this show come to life and to expand not only Gravity Forms and the people behind it, but the users like myself and the community. But it's interesting because you really get a sense of who the company is, like the actual people, because again, going back to what I said earlier, I don't know what you think about Gravity Forms, whoever's listening to this or watching this, but you might think it's like, some super jacked up entrepreneur who's, all gung ho and is really high stress and high strung, but they're all like the coolest down to earth dudes. That first interview that you posted, I'll make sure we link that in the show notes. They're just normal guys. Like I would probably see them at a barbecue joint and, if I found out they were Gravity Forms, I'd sure we'd have a beer and hang out and talk for a little bit. Like it really is cool to find out who is behind some of these bigger brands. And so I'm really excited to see that come to life. But here's the kicker. Here's the question for you to kind of kick off the content strategy. What were the initial discussions about like what to actually do? Because you want to humanize the brand, you want to add video, but then it's like, okay, I'm sure you guys went through this, which is, all right, what avenue do I want to go down? Like, do we want to do blogging? Do we want to do pure like video type series? Do we want to make a podcast? Should it be audio and video? Should it be like a monthly video? Should it be tutorials? What were the initial talks of what the content strategy should be? And how did you guys settle on an input?
That's a great question. And I think from my perspective, I have my own view, and happy to share a little bit of that and the strategy here. So if you think about Gravity Forms and the ecosystem that we have a core product, right? Gravity Forms itself. And we have an incredible user base around that and add-ons and, just a whole network of tooling there. But it's still something that can be intimidating for new users because of how much extensibility there is and how much power there is, even just in the core product. So when you look at that, and when you look at growth strategies and things like that, we know that one of the most important things we have to do as a product company is continue to acquire new users. We have to figure out how to keep that network effect or that brand value continuing to expand and grow into audiences for a number of reasons. But the way that I look at it is, you want, when you're a professional and let's say, like you're running an agency like I do. And in my agency, I used Gravity Forms as well. You're always thinking, what tooling am I going to install that's going to stick with a user from the start through their growth, right? And expand with them so that I'm not constantly going back and having to rethink tooling and rebuild things and do all that kind of stuff, right? Like if I can give them one tool that's actually going to deliver for them over and over and over again and grow with them, then I'm actually doing them a favor as well as myself a favor, because I'm not having to go in and constantly rebuild things.
Great point.
So that's the approach that exists with Gravity Forms. But in order for that to work well and for the company to continue to grow, it needs to be able to add new users to that and do that. So the content strategy for gravityforms.com is very much about new users and bringing them in. But once they're in, then it becomes about how do we help them figure out what's available to them, because you don't know what you don't know. And so with the size of Gravity Forms add-on ecosystem, we have this opportunity to solve way more problems than most people realize. You can do pretty well anything with Gravity Forms. If you're collecting any kind of data, or if you're looking to do any kind of automated workflow with your content or with what users are doing when they interact with your website, you can do that with Gravity Forms or Gravity Forms and one of the add-ons that exists. So, retention became a big part of that. So I'm getting to our strategy for input, but you have to understand that's the foundation. The foundation is helping Gravity Forms. So we will do, and we continue to do things through our primary channels, like anything Gravity Forms branded will be tutorial driven and new user driven, and supporting existing users and providing them with roadmaps on how to build things to get the result that they're after. But if you look at what's going on with WordPress right now, we're seeing, in my opinion, we're seeing a generational shift between the pioneers, the founders of WordPress, and those tinkerers who knew how to get stuck into the PHP and the code and to build it themselves, to this next generation of users. And remember, WordPress is 18, 19 years old now. So people who were born the day WordPress is born are going to college, and they're getting ready to enter into the work world. And we've seen that shift coming, because even as a community and an open source foundation, we've been anticipating this, which is why Gutenberg exists and the full site editing experience exists. Because in order for WordPress to continue to grow and to continue to democratize the web and make it accessible and open for everyone, we need to make it easier for more and more people to actually use the tooling. And so this generational shift that's happening is a move beyond the WordPress developer, the WordPress tinkerer, to somebody who really, for them, it's just a platform that they sell their merch on, or they blog out of, or they create content through, or they leverage to build relationship with their customers. And because of that, they don't care necessarily about all the other bits, right? They just want tools that work for them. They want them to be easy to use, and they want them to be easier to expand and grow with their business. So that's really where the strategy for input comes in, and why input exists the way it does. It is not necessarily targeting the core WordPress audience that you might think. What it's doing is, strategically, and where my head is at with it, is that I really believe that this new audience out there that is starting to use WordPress as a tool rather than as, like that guy who is always able to open the hood to the car and check the engine and know what's going on, is that we have this opportunity to really take WordPress mainstream. And when I say mainstream, what I mean is we're a $600 billion a year industry that is mostly engineers and professionals. Imagine what we could do if we could expand to the everyday person, to those people that are out there with no desire to learn any of that, but they want to hear success stories. They want to know about, what it means to live WordPress as a lifestyle.
So it's interesting. Really what you're talking about there, James, is target market, and you're looking at your demographics very carefully. I'm sure there was a lot of data result type of research that was, conducted there. And I imagine that you guys looked at your customers from when it started to maybe like a few years after, which is probably when I came on board with it. Because when I used Gravity Forms, it was neck and neck with a few other builders. I just happened to really like Gravity Forms, and then it stuck with me. Same thing like you mentioned earlier, it was just such a reliable product. And even though I tried other builders at some point, other form builders, I always went back to Gravity Forms because it was always more reliable. It had the best support, the best add-ons, and that was huge for me. But now it is interesting because we're at like phase 3, it sounds like, with customers. And you're exactly right. And I'm a Divi guy. I use the Divi theme by Elegant Themes. I think they're similar, being that I've been with them and really followed them closely. They are definitely looking at both the professionals, the experts, the developers, but also the DIYers and the people who are fed up with Squarespace, fed up with Wix, want something that they control, but is also easy to use. So I imagine that played a part in this. So that's really interesting. But my next question would be, why a name that is not Gravity Forms centric? So why not Gravity Forms Podcast? What's up with input? And I'm just playing devil's advocate as somebody who might say, how is that related to Gravity Forms?
Well, it's a bit of a play on words, because if you think about what a form is, it's a collection of input fields. So the idea of input it's loosely tied that way. But if you expand it out a little bit and just think about, input, it comes down to, I think, my personality a little bit. And a lot of, and I have to be honest, a lot of this is driven by me and my personality and how I think and process. But, I've always believed that stories are the most valuable thing we can share as content creators. That story is evergreen. It's the kind of content that lasts long beyond your time in any role or in anything that you do. And when I think about stories, I think about not just the surface level, but I'm always curious about what goes into actually making that happen. So you think about like some of the stories that we're going to tell on input. I did an interview with a recording artist, right? Like a major label recording artist who's got millions of records sold, and talking to them about, so tell me what's the process of getting signed? What's it like to grow a fan base, right? And who does what in the band, and what's the band dynamic like? Like the kinds of questions that are always skipped when they do a face-to-face interview, like a TV interview. Like you always get the fluff, but you never get the inner workings, right? And I've always been like, you know what? They don't just go from like somebody sitting in their garage making music to all of a sudden, debuting and having their first record signed. There's a lot of hard work that goes into that. And no matter what creative industry you're in, no matter what industry you're in, there are steps that we skip over when it comes to how our success or how we got places. And I think for me, like input is digging into that, getting into the story.
I love that, man. It's so important. And I think that is one of the best ways to humanize both the company itself and the users. And I often, when I think about story marketing, and I know Story Brand is really popular, Donald Miller's book, and I'm a big fan of that framework. I'm a big fan of anything that is going to dive into the why in something. And that really is what story marketing is. It addresses the why instead of just the what. So for Gravity Forms, I'm sure it would be easy to have a marketing page that is like, here's what Gravity Forms is and here's what it does. But what is even more powerful, and whether this is used on the same page or completely separate, is a why type story. Case in point, my story. Would it be more intriguing for somebody to see a form builder that, you can see how it sets up and what kind of fields you can add and the add-ons? Or if you hear Josh say, I've been using Gravity Forms for 9 years and it's been like a solid rock for my business and it's never let me down. Personally, that is going to resonate with me so much more. So I think it's a great point. I hope that's just a practical example of how stories can really make marketing just so much more powerful. And I hope everyone realizes too, this applies to any type of service you're doing, which is why it's so important to get testimonials and case studies and bring the story out of those results. So I love that. Is that kind of one of the main underlying things you were focused on, was like the results, but not in like a data driven type of standpoint, but yeah, that story and that human type of approach when it comes to results?
So it's an interesting question, and it's one the team has been challenging me on as well, because I think it's like, like that's the most natural step you could think of, right? Is that you want to have content that's going to help you convert for your today business. Where I have been pushing back, and one of the things I think is important for anybody who's in business to think about, is not just your business of today, but your business of tomorrow and your business of the future. And how are you setting yourself up, not to necessarily reach your audience that you're grabbing right now with your existing marketing, but what is the audience that you see coming up that you need to be starting now to think about attracting? So, full site editing is brand new. Gutenberg's still relatively new. There's enough people out there with the classic editor, for example, still turned on.
I still love the classic editor more than Gutenberg currently. Yeah.
So we still have a little bit of time where the way we've continued to do it will be enough. But for us, I think, and my strategy here is to go, what's the audience that's coming up? What are they doing? Where are they at? What's something that's going to be attractive to them? And how can I grow an audience there and build trust with them, even if I don't have a natural connection yet between the stories or all of that and some kind of conversion to a Gravity Forms user? What's important is that we're doing both, right? So as I said, we still have Gravity Forms branded channels. We have tutorials and all different kinds of content across our blog and our YouTube channel and social media. And input, the reason why it's branded as it is and the reason why it's different is we're looking at the next audience in the WordPress ecosystem or the next audience in the web and saying, how can we be attractive to them? How can we go after them while also still being relevant and, great consumable content for those who already love and use Gravity Forms?
Yeah. And when it comes to this next audience, I'm going to put my kids these days hat on. Did you do any actual data measured research or anything like that? Or was it more of just a common sense approach to content? Like, kids these days like stories and they like the why, and they like somebody that they're going to trust, whether it's an influencer or, I imagine that came into play with wanting it to be video and podcast. But yeah, how did you, I guess the question is, how did you determine, who that up and coming audience is?
That's a great question. And I think that data is something anyone can get. It's not something that is reserved for big business. So no matter what size your business is, or even if you're just a solopreneur or a freelancer, anything you can do to dig out some data is important. So we did a big customer survey with our existing customers to get some demographic data, to get some user data, to find out who our core customer of today was. What we discovered is that a lot of them are in that developer professional space. A lot of them have been using the product for 3 to 5 years and 5 years plus.
I think I remember getting that. Now that it just flashed back that I think I remember getting an email, and I'm sure I sent in I've been using it for this long,
Yeah. So we knew who our today audience was very clearly because we could see that. And some of it, of course, is also gut and looking at trends and what's going on and saying, the way I looked at it, I was coming in and I'd done a little bit of research for myself on Instagram and trying to build up my own personal brand on Instagram or whatever. And I can remember looking at the WordPress world and where WordPress happened in terms of social networking, and it's still on Twitter. Twitter is not where the audience of tomorrow is, right? They are on Instagram, they're on TikTok, they're on, YouTube, right? And so you've got this video first content approach versus a text first content approach, which I think is where a lot of things are. Even audio only is great, but we're starting to see this rise in podcasts, especially over the pandemic. It's been great, I think, for the podcast industry. But we're also seeing now a lot more podcasts going, look, I'm already creating the content. Why don't I just film it and put it on YouTube?
Repurpose it.
Right. And I can repurpose the same content. So, and then you look at all of these channels now and everybody's doing video. So, even though Twitter doesn't have a ton of video, you can still get video on there, and Instagram is the same with IGTV, and you've got, So I think it's going, okay, we've, from a data point of view, we know who our existing audience is. We know where they are, and we know how to talk to them and to create content for them. And we're going to keep doing that to the best of our ability. But for tomorrow, we want to start looking at what can we do in the space to actually be attractive to a new audience. Gotcha.
And of course, I'm a huge fan of the long form interviews. And I think our talk was well longer than probably what most of your episodes will be. That's not a shocker though, for anyone who's been listening to this podcast for a while. Cause I like to go deep, and I hate surfacey, quick, mainstream media type conversations. I don't want a 5-minute clip that was scripted and outlined. I want just real talk. And I think a lot of people are like me, and I'm totally finding that with this podcast. The cool thing is, when it comes to repurposing content, if you do a long form interview, you can always cut it down and repurpose it in different ways. Is that kind of what your idea is with starting with, a half an hour, 45-minute, whatever talk that's both video and audio? Is your idea, James, to then, I don't know if you have it all planned out now or if you're just going to see how it evolves and then maybe, sprinkle in a 2-minute video for IGTV or a video for Facebook or a video for TikTok. I don't even know. I don't use TikTok, so I don't know how that works. But is that kind of the idea, the approach that you have?
Absolutely. It's, like you said, if you're making something, if you're creating something, you've already done the hard work of coming up with the idea. You've done all the work of actually recording it, and you want to give yourself as many options as possible. So, and it's an opportunity, not just for the moment, right? Like you think about, we've just launched this episode with the founders of Gravity Forms. We've got a 40-minute episode. And in there are a bunch of great nuggets that we can repurpose and reuse so that content lives on long beyond the bump of the initial premiere of the episode. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the value of it as well. It's really actually being smart about how you are building content and your content strategy as well, and thinking not just for today, but like, I plan to use this content for months and months and just pull it out when I'm going, I don't have a post today for Instagram, and let's put that up. Right.
Yeah.
And do that kind of thing.
That's kind of one thing I'm working on with this show, because I think your episode, let's see, let me look at the sheet here. It's probably you'll be in the 140s.
Whoa.
A lot of episodes to pull from. Now, they're not all interviews. A lot of those are solo episodes, but I'm still able now to, I reference them all the time. And they've been great lead gens for my courses in a lot of cases, because I am doing free master classes and trainings and more intentional funnels to courses and higher ticket items. But a podcast that dives into, my web design process, that's a half an hour, it's free. That's a great, here, check this out. This will give you a good idea for this. And then what a great lead gen that has become for me. So I'm finding, and I think you'll find this too, and this is a good principle for everybody, when you take the time to invest in this content, whether it's an interview or a solo podcast or a tutorial on YouTube or whatever, you can absolutely refer back to it months, even years down the road. And then, you can always repurpose it. And I'm actually considering, maybe this probably isn't something I personally have time for, but maybe Nathan, my editor, Nathan, I'm going to talk to you right now. Maybe have him or somebody go through and pull some of the top like episodes and tips and make a compilation, or do some things that could really highlight some of the certain topics that we've gone over. So there's there's all sorts of avenues for this. It is slightly overwhelming. I guess one question I have for you, James, is how do you avoid the overwhelm of what you can do with content? Because this is also something that is very paralyzing for people. They're like, okay, I'm going to start, I'm going to do it. And then they're like, what am I going to do? I don't know. Should I do a YouTube channel? Should I just do social media videos? Should I just do a podcast? Should I do a written blog? How do you avoid, all these different options, and how do you take it one step at a time when it comes to creating content?
Oh, I'm fairly structured that way. My wife and I, we often joke because we approach problem solving or creativity in the opposite way. I start out with figuring out what my end result is, and then I work back from that. And she just starts with, like something, and then figures it out as she goes. We both end up finishing at the same time, but how we got there is very different.
Interesting.
Anyway, I tell that just to say that that's sort of my approach to thinking through content, and it may work for people who think like me, but may not work for others. But the best thing that I can say when it comes to that is, number one, and I haven't, like there's lots of advice out there, so that's why I'm pausing. Take this with a grain of salt. Don't start right away. The first thing, the best thing you can do to avoid that paralysis is to plan out and get some content under your belt before you ever launch it. And so to give you an example, I've been filming for 2 months before we've even launched our first episode, because what I wanted to do was get a sense of the flow of content for our channel, sort of piece together conceptually and thematically at a high level where the content was going. And I've done a few things, and I'll give you a couple of practical examples of what I've done. So the first thing I did was I said, okay, what do I want to operate in seasons, right? And I said yes, because I want a start date and I want an end date. So I want to have that arc of content. And then I started thinking, okay, well, within that, what are some things that I can do to not have it be the same thing every week? Like how can I spice it up a little bit? And I watched a bunch of YouTube channels, and there's one channel that I really love. It's called Jolly, and it's these two British guys. It's a British guy who speaks Korean and his best mate, and the two of them, they just get on and they do really silly things. But what I love about it is they have these sub-series of content. So they've got an arc of content, all around trying foods from around the world. They have another one where they drive around in a limo in London and introduce their friends to Korean food, right? And they have another one where they go online and they try to buy the most random things. Now, it's super entertaining for me, but what they've done is they've actually created these thematic, sort of like sub-series within their content stream that gives enough variety for people, but also allows them to be creative as well. And so I think for me, that's been really helpful. So with input, what we've tried to do is we have a 23 episode season, which is a standard season in the US, North America, right? From a TV point of view. We're aiming for half an hour because it's the length of a normal TV show or a average commute from home to work. And the themes that we've got are things that we can really lean into, and we can go out and source guests and do content that actually is quite intentional. Yeah, that's another big part of it. And so by doing that, we're actually able to approach each episode with confidence. And the last thing, and I know I've been talking about this for a while, so I know.
You can see a question right on the tip of my tongue.
It's, I can see the question, but this is also important, is that start with one channel and create great content for that primary channel. And then if you're ready, or if you've got capacity, you can expand out from there. So we decided early on, we were going to be a video first show. So we were going to be a YouTube channel. That was our number one thing. And we knew we were going to go to audio because we could do that literally at the same time when we export our video. We can just split out the audio and do that. And there's very little extra work on top of that. And from there, then it was like, well, if you want your YouTube channel to be successful, you've got to promote it. So we picked a couple of key channels that we knew would work for us, but our content was able to almost create itself, because the core of the content was the YouTube show itself, right? And from there, we already knew what we were going to do on social media, because it was all related to whatever that episode was for the week. So, introducing the guests, talking about the topic, whatever, doing a preview clip, all those kinds of things. It basically wrote itself. And so it made it easier as a content creator not to get bogged down in the pressure to be looking week to week, But it allows us to actually thematically look at things, to write content, to be strategic about our guests, and to create content that we hope will be relevant to our audience.
That's great. A couple big points that I took out from there. One was to really plan and strategically think through launching something, because this is the other problem. And it kind of goes against my initial gut feeling, which is just do something, get it out there. But the problem with that is if you're not somebody who is used to doing something consistently, you're likely going to start, and then about 2 months later, it's just going to fall flat. Or if you don't have what's most important with content is a content strategy for like continuing to create it. That's why it doesn't work out. That's why so many podcasts start and then they fade, or YouTube channels start and then they fade. Case in point, when I started this podcast, it was at the end of 2019. I had thought about starting this in the summer of 2018, but I knew I was still right in the middle of creating a lot of different courses. I was still running my agency along with it. And I knew, as much as I wanted to dive into the podcast, I did not have the bandwidth for it yet. I knew I was going to get there. But I also knew, I think because I didn't have all of the courses I wanted created, I realized at this point, I think it's more beneficial for me to make really amazing kick-ass courses. And then once I'm done with them or far along with all of my main courses, then I can go more heavy on content marketing. And that's really mainly what I do right now. I'm in the process of revamping courses and adding lessons and adding new ones eventually. But mainly what I do on a week-to-week basis is content marketing through podcasts, and I'm reinvigorating my YouTube channel. And there was another good lesson you mentioned there too, Chris, which was to just choose one channel and then figure out the places that are going to be the best ROI. Because this was kind of the second big point that I took out from that. And that is, if you try to do a YouTube show and podcasts and tutorials and promote them on LinkedIn and TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, that's so much to do at once. You're likely just going to face so much overwhelm. You're not even going to do it. So it's so much better to just focus on like one channel, really grow that. And if you want to, whether it's email marketing or one social media channel that you like best, just pick a couple channels to help promote that. That's what I did. And I can say in full confidence, that's what really helped me avoid the same type of overwhelm. Is I started with YouTube, and I just did YouTube videos, which helped me build my authority and in my name, and get a lot of people into my courses. And then I took a little bit of a break from doing constant YouTube videos and launched the podcast. And now I have strategies for both, that I'm able to do both at the same time simultaneously. And I don't feel overwhelmed because I have a good feel for both of them. I have my processes in place, and I can do those consistently. So all that to say, that's kind of the way I approach my content game. And it sounds like you really took a lot of those lessons to heart. And I think that's what a lot of people should think about with their own content, is sticking with one or two channels that you're comfortable with, that well, or that you're excited about, and then just do it consistently, or have an end date. What you mentioned there with the seasons, that's great. And when I started my YouTube channel, one of the best things I did was I gave myself a 12-week deadline. I said, I'm going to do a new tutorial once a week for 12 weeks. So there was an end in sight. And I can't tell you how beneficial that was for me, because it ended up being a lot of work. I was new to tutorials, but at the end of that 12 weeks, I accomplished it. It was a huge boost. And then I felt really comfortable to do that consistently. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that's definitely what I applied to the content.
Yeah. The other side to that is it helps you avoid scope creep. So when you think about your content and what you're doing, there are a ton of great ideas that you haven't thought of yet that are just waiting there for you to pick them up and do them. And it's so tempting when you don't have a plan, or when you're just going week to week, to pivot before the right time, or to jump into something and follow that rabbit trail. I was in a meeting yesterday with my editor, Dustin, and he and I were chatting, and it's interesting because he's actually seen a bunch of these episodes. So he's seeing the themes and these arcs of conversation and story that are starting to peek through, but he's throwing out ideas, and we're spitballing ideas now for season 2, going, we already know. And we've got confidence in season 1 that we're going to be able to deliver the content that we want and do it well, that we can actually start planning out and thinking about how this great new content is going to be for season 2. And so it frees you from having from the tyranny of the urgent, right? Of thinking everything has to be done right now. And your greatest idea is the one that's your latest idea. Well, that's not necessarily true. Finish strong the idea that you started with, and then go on to the next one. And you'll see yourself grow, I think, from strength to strength.
Oh, definitely.
Build upon.
Yeah. And it tends to get better and better. And then even from the, as the host, from the standpoint of like producing stuff, it was funny because before we went live, you were like, the anxiousness of launch day on anything it always takes so much out of you. And, I let you know before we went live. Luckily, that fades after, for me, it was about in between 20 and 30 episodes. I used to get like so anxious and nervous when it was episode launch day because I was like, oh, I hope everything goes right. I hope it's well received. Now that I'm 140 in, I don't really think about it. It does become like a muscle you just get used to. And I think that's true for anything in life. But once you build that confidence step by step, it really does. It goes through every aspect of content marketing because suddenly, I think this is a really important point too. It's okay to feel out of your element or a little nervous or uncomfortable when you're doing certain content marketing because you haven't done it yet or you haven't done it to that level. Like I was nervous when I started my podcast because I got really good at doing videos and tutorials, but a conversation is a whole different ballgame. And it's, as you're probably finding out a couple months into it, it's extremely draining to do a really good interview. Isn't it weird? Like you wouldn't think it would be that draining, but particularly when for us, it's not just like a random conversation. This is an intentional conversation with what is hopefully an end result with this topic. It is very draining. And the good news is, I can tell you this in full confidence here, James, doing this for almost 2 years now, it doesn't take near as much out of me as it used to. Like I filled my schedule up the first couple months I did my podcast and I was like, I'm wiped. I can't even focus on anything else because I'm done right now after this interview. Yeah. But I say all that to say you build a muscle. And this goes with anything. It's like building a website. The first couple times it's terrible, but then you do better and better. The more you do it, it's like anything, you get better. And that confidence and that, quote unquote muscle building for that really does filter through everything because suddenly you're interviewing better without having to think too hard about it. This interview, we don't have show notes or an outline that we're basing this off of. I'm curious and I know the end result for this episode, which is know how to create good content that's going to help, build community and sell a service and product. So I don't really need to have like a list that I see a lot of podcasters do. And I think that's okay at first, maybe to have a direction to head to, but it does get easier. Production gets, you get used to the tools, you get used to how you distribute it. So I just wanted to say that because I think it really is important to remember that when you start something, the first couple months are going to be a little rough or a lot of work, but it does get easier and consistency becomes easier. Have you found that even a couple months in? I mean, have you started to turn that corner yet, or is that going to be season 2 that you'll turn it?
Well, anecdotally, I can say that I've had a little bit of experience doing the video thing. A couple of years ago, I was on tour for Envato, doing something we called Euro Tour, and I decided that I was going to be a travel vlogger throughout the whole thing. And then create content and post them sort of every day. I don't know why I thought I was going to be able to do that while also traveling from city to city and doing actual physical presentations at conferences.
Oh man,
meetups. But man, I tried it. But I can remember the first time I pulled out my camera in the airport in Toronto and doing the whole Casey Neistat vlog thing, running around being like, I have to get over this fear of being on camera, this fear of being, out there and on. So that was a good experience. And, by the time, 2 days, 3 days in, I was fine. And I would just talk to the camera walking down the street. I can remember doing that in Amsterdam, just whipping out the camera and walking down the street in Amsterdam. And everyone's just sort of like, another one,
Oh yeah, another blogger. Well, and that's also a good point, James, of just trying something out because while I'm a big fan of somebody committing to something, there is there's a lot of room to just try something out to really see what you think about it. Case in point, before I launched my podcast, earlier that year, beginning of 2019, I created a little, almost like mini video podcast series. It was a 9-part series about scaling a Divi web design business. And that was almost my trial run to see okay, how do I interview? Do I like this? I know it's not going to be perfect, but how do I feel about this? Because it was both the video show and the kind of an audio type podcast, although it wasn't actually a podcast. It was mainly just the video. But I say that to say I did 9 episodes, interviewed people, and I found out that I actually really like this. I got, even just in 9 episodes, I got better and better each one, and I got more comfortable. I was less nervous. I started asking better questions. I stopped saying and right and so and a crazy amount of filler words. I still work hard at that, but it definitely helped me with some of that. And then that was really the jettison of feeling confident to do this podcast. So again, just all to say, there's a lot of room for just trying something out too, right? To see what you think and to see if you're good at it.
Well, I think, that's one of the reasons why I said as well, like developing seasons or having a start and end date means you don't have to commit to something indefinitely. That's scary, right? To think that, you've got to do something for forever, or you sort of commit to it and you build up all that stress. I will say one of the neat things about sort of the way that I've been doing it is because we knew we were going to be launching on a specific day, and we had a bunch of people we already wanted to interview and stories we wanted to tell and share. We were able to do it out of sequence. So the founder episode actually isn't the first one I recorded. It's actually maybe the 5th or 6th one that I've recorded.
Okay.
So it'll be interesting as these other episodes air to see if people can figure out which one was the first. The first is also funny because I had to record it twice, because the first time we recorded it, I did it without having headphones in. And so there was this huge echoey reverb feedback going on through the whole thing. I felt so bad, but I had to go to my guest and say, I'm sorry, can I get an extra hour of your time to re-record this, which was actually really good because I was so nervous in that first one. I'm almost glad it was a throwaway episode because, the second time around, I was like, okay, no, I was so nervous to even talk, right? I just let them talk. I would interject a question. And as it's gone on, I've started to go, no, it's okay for me to have an opinion. It's okay for me to share my own thoughts, my own stories here. And so, yeah, absolutely. As you go, you will figure out after every episode or after every engagement with your content, what you liked about it, what you want to change, or what you might want to try doing the next time around. And that's a fun creative adventure as well.
The sequence is definitely interesting. My episodes jumble around pretty frequently. I don't record one episode and then launch it, then record another one. I did at first, about the first 75 episodes. That's how I did it. But more recently, because I'm so far out, I'm generally about 1.5 to 2 months out on podcast episodes now, which is great. It's awesome to be at that point because that means I can take a month off and doing podcast interviews if I want. Takes a while to get to that point, but it is interesting. I try to keep them in sequential order now, just because I've caught myself saying things that out of order, and then it can be a little confusing. But it is interesting that that's an option. You could go either way. You could do things in order, or you could do things completely randomly. And one of the best, I think, most important things to remember with content now, whether it's YouTube, WordPress blog, podcast, whatever, is you can bulk record, and you can you can have 2 days a week where you record interviews and do content. You can schedule it out, and then you could take a week or 2 off. I do that all the time. It's honestly why I have my week set up to where I only generally record on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, sometimes Thursdays. But those are my recording days, and I'm able, if I'm a couple months ahead, I don't have to record podcasts. I'm doing quite a few podcasts this week. The next 3 weeks, I don't think I have any podcast interviews scheduled. So I hope that's freeing for people too, to remember, just because you do a weekly show doesn't mean that you need to actually record once a week. You can do them in bulk and then release them whenever.
That's been a huge win for me. And I think it's interesting, when you because I've known that I was going to be doing this show for about 5 or 6 months before we actually sat down and started doing it, I was able to take a look at how other people were doing it. And I read a lot of, people's stories of how they started their podcasts and how they started their YouTube channel. And I tried to consume as much as I could on the strategy, the tech, the approach to content creation as I possibly could to try to develop a system that would work well for me. And one of the things that I saw on a show that I was watching was that they took 2 weeks and they filmed, an entire season for them in 2 weeks. And I went, oh, that makes a ton of sense. If they're only half an hour episodes, right? Maybe you record for an hour, then you get 8 episodes in a day kind of thing, right? Or 5 if that's too much. But think about that. Like you could get 10 episodes done in 2 days and that's 10 weeks of content. That's incredible. Yeah. So that was really freeing for me because my big worry, and it still is the tyranny of the next episode. Like it's coming, the next episode's coming and launch day is around the corner and not wanting to get stuck in a spot where I was throwing out bad content because I didn't have anything else. And I was worried about, like the algorithm or whatever it is about, like trying to make sure I was consistent. I think that's important, but I want to do that from a place of energy and quality as opposed to a place of desperation.
It's a good point. The quality versus quantity thing is something that I struggle with big time. I've fluctuated with the amount of podcasts I do per month. And then now that I'm implementing YouTube, I'm debating on at the end of 2021, maybe just going to one podcast a week. Cause right now I'm doing about 6 a month on average. I like to sprinkle in some solo episodes. So I'm kind of trying to debate on what's working to make sure it is quality, and same thing with the YouTube videos. I try to stick to one a week, but I'm not going to be shy about maybe having a couple weeks off if I make a really good bigger video. But again, the beauty about all of that is you can record a lot and create a lot in a couple weeks or a few weeks, and then that can last you for several months potentially. So that's a really important point, because I think a lot of people as busy business owners think there's no way I have time for content marketing. But this is actually something I told an old realtor client of mine, and it blew her mind. I was like, what if you wrote, if you wanted to do one blog post every couple of weeks, what if you on a Friday took a few hours and just wrote, 3 or 4 articles? Well, suddenly, barring the distribution and some tweaking, there's like 2 months of content for you right there. And she was like, oh, I didn't think about that. So I don't need to like every Friday literally write. I could do it like in a bulk of time. I was like, yep, that's exactly how I do it. And it's a really, really freeing thought. And it's honestly comforting for me to remember that, because it's so easy to fall in the trap of like constant, continuous content. But the fact is consistency and the amount of time somebody gets to hear you and you hit them on these different channels, it really does build that trust and authority. So all really good points. I'm curious, as we kind of get putting a cap on this conversation, what is the plan for, I guess, quote unquote, measuring success of this channel? I imagine it's not going to be about the number of views necessarily, but are you going to, over the rest of 2021 and then the next year, do you foresee maybe just looking at, I'm sure factoring into sales will be a part of it, but are you going to look at the type of community and the responses that you're getting? Well, what's the measuring of success look like with this channel?
I have, maybe not unsurprisingly, a 3 to 5 year plan for the channel. Because again, I like to plan and think and prep in advance. But, we don't know yet what audience is going to be excited about input. So another good reason for us to have a separate brand is, what if it fails? What if it doesn't work? Well, then it's easy to kill without having to kill off Gravity Forms, right? Like it doesn't negatively impact our core product and our core brand. It we have this freedom to spin something up, to test it out, see if it finds an audience, and then burn it off if it doesn't. But like I'll let you in on the strategy, and I don't know if I should, but it's probably okay. But we don't know yet what the audience is going to be. So right now, for I think the next 6 months to a year, it's let's see if we can grow an audience and how big of an audience we can grow. Can we create some stickiness with a following, and can it begin to fuel its own growth? Can it begin to grow itself organically, whether that's through algorithms, through search, through recommendations, through, sharing across social? Like, let's see what it can do that way. And if we can get to a place where we're confident that it can sustain itself from an audience growth point of view, then it becomes a question of, okay, how then do we, what steps do we want to take to generate revenue? Not generate profit, but generate revenue. Can we get it to a place where it's generating revenue? If we can do that, whatever that monetization strategy looks like, great. Now that could be connecting it directly to gravityforms.com and selling, products and licenses, but maybe not. Maybe it's something completely different. And so we want to be open to whatever that could be. And then from there, if we can generate revenue, then it becomes, okay, how do we then make it profitable? How do we get it from just bringing money in to streamlining things or cutting away things or starting things that are going to actually help it go from just generating something to generating enough that it's actually profitable and sustainable in the long run.
Well, the really cool thing about a podcast and a video show, and I'm not sure, how far you've thought into this or whether you're expecting this, but this interview right here is an offshoot of me coming onto the show and you interviewing me. And I don't know if you anticipated that. So you're able to talk to my audience about this. You didn't have to run a Facebook ad to reach them. You didn't have to do any sort of other marketing. You just came on my show. That is one of the biggest benefits with doing any sort of interview or YouTube show, podcast, whatever, is you immediately expand your network. It's like networking groups. And this is something that I learned early on when I joined a networking group. It wasn't just those people who were my clients, it was who they knew. And that is the beauty about podcasts and video shows is not only are the guests that you're bringing on, are you going to influence and be able to gain from, but suddenly they may want to have you on their shows and they may want to promote input. And then you best believe when my episode drops on input, I'm going to share it. And then suddenly my audience is looking at it. So there's definitely a trickle down effect that is very unique with podcasts. It's one reason I love podcasting is I've seen it work like this. It's like I'll hear somebody will join one of my courses and they're like, oh yeah, I heard you on, somebody else's show. And then that's how I came across you. And it's amazing. I love that because it's like organic, real marketing that yes, it does take time, but it beats running, targeted ads that can be sometimes really expensive. So, I'm curious to see how that's going to pan out for you guys in season 1 and onward. So I'm really excited for you, man. I was kind of curious about what the end goal was. It sounds like it's, a little bit open-ended with kind of seeing how it goes, which is great because you can pivot, tweak things if need be, or see how it responds. The cool thing, and I'm going to make a prediction for you guys. I think it's going to be pretty big because I know when Elegant Themes, when they were really promoting Divi, they launched Divi Nation, which was a story-driven, user-based show. And I was on that. It really piqued my interest with the community of Divi. I think that's kind of what you guys will probably experience with Gravity Forms too, is you'll get a lot of different users. And as you well know, being in the WordPress world for so long, it's such a generous and giving type of community. I could see it spreading like wildfire. So
I hope so. The flip side to the good is you're always nervous about, the critiques and how it's actually going to be received. I think it's launch day for me. So funnily enough, we got a dislike on our video.
Oh, and that's going to happen. That'll look.
I know.
I saw the thumbs down. When I looked at that, I looked at it pretty quickly because I was excited to see what the first couple episodes were going to be like. So I think I saw it on Facebook that you guys mentioned the first episode was out. So I looked, and I think there was maybe 30 some views at the beginning, and you already got a thumbs down. I get the same thing. That's one thing that I realized with YouTube in particular. It's kind of one reason I love audio podcasts. They can't like or dislike an episode. YouTube is brutal, and you could make a video and you could be the most helpful person with the most kind message, and you could just have the utmost care and genuine, love for somebody in the world, and some douchebag is going to give it a thumbs down. It always happens, whether it's a troll, whether it's just a sarcastic person thinking they're being funny, whatever it is. So I don't know. I say that to say, don't worry about that. And in fact, I learned pretty early on with my YouTube channel, if I don't get a few haters, I'm probably doing something wrong. You got to get a few haters in there, and then okay, my channel is actually getting some traction, because now there are some people who are either putting spammy links or some sort of troll type of message. So in a weird way, that's actually a bit of a measure for success. Is the more haters you get, you're probably getting 10 times as many people who really love it. So.
Well, that is one thing. You see, I'm fine with it only because the dislike actually came before the episode premiered. So
there you go.
It was not even, they hadn't even seen the episode. They were just being funny. And I would not be surprised if it was somebody from Gravity Forms who's just being cheeky and actually did a dislike just for the fun of it. But no, they're not that bad.
Well, so one of my mentors is Pat Flynn, and he's a really well-known entrepreneur, and he went live during COVID every day for a year. And I would tune into some of his live streams, and it was always funny because the minute he would go live, he'd get like 2 or 3 thumbs downs. And a couple of times people would say like, who's you giving a thumbs down? And even Pat said, he's like, oh, that's to be expected. Like it's not anything I'm worried about, because he's used to, he's had to develop a lot of thick skin, which he was actually on this podcast in episode 100. And he talked about dealing with trolls and how to get over that, to not take it personally. So didn't mean for this conversation to go there, but I definitely am interested in doing a whole conversation on dealing with trolls, or a whole episode about that, because I've definitely had to learn to get some thick skin and just not respond. Sometimes I just have to tell myself, Josh, don't respond. It's not worth it. Let it go and keep on creating good content. So good stuff, James. Well, awesome, man. Well, hey, I'm so pumped for you. I was going to ask where you'd like people to go. That's probably not a shocker, but input is the channel. Do you want them to go to a certain website? Do you want them to go to YouTube? Where would you like my audience to go to find out more about the show?
I mean, you can find input if you search really hard on Apple and Spotify and YouTube. So probably the best place to go is just welcometoinput.com. And across all the socials at Welcome to Input. So we try to keep it really simple that way and make it easy for people to find it.
Beautiful. Yeah, we'll link that in the show notes. Just last question for you. I'm curious, what are you most excited about with this whole endeavor? Is it like a personal growth thing that you've enjoyed? What are you personally super excited about? Or is it just seeing it come to life after months and months of work and planning?
I have to give a bunch of props to Gravity Forms, because they did not put a lot of limits or restrictions on me and my thinking about this. Like, you can get started relatively cost effectively, but I wanted to go big, and the amount of money that they poured into me and into this, to make it possible has been huge. But even more than that, it was interesting when I was getting started and I was brainstorming like what this content would be. Initially, the idea of connecting creativity with purpose, that's our tagline for Input, that was actually a separate show. That was going to be my own personal thing. And I can remember I walked into a meeting with my manager, Mark, and we were, just doing our one-on-ones like we normally do. And at the end of it, we were talking about concept for the show and what it might be and where it could go. And I said, I just want you to know, I've got this idea to do these stories, that are both inside and outside the WordPress ecosystem. And like my personal mission is to connect creativity with purpose. But if I could do this with the blessing of Gravity Forms, how I would like that would just be amazing. He just looked at me and he said, well, why not?
Yeah,
right.
That's cool.
And why not? And that was really the birth of Input, because all of a sudden it was like, I think we all do this. We put barriers in front of ourselves, like, oh, they'll never go for that, or, oh, this could never happen, or that they might, like even asking for the kind of lighting that I wanted to get for the studio or the microphone I wanted to get. Oh, that's just going to be too much. But what I have found with Gravity Forms is that they're so supportive of letting they hire and they trust their team, right? They hire well, and then they trust their team to do things. And for me, it was like every time I put that barrier in front of myself, I'd talk it out with my manager, say, I'm nervous, but just ask. And they've been amazing. And so for me to have their blessing to do that, what I'm most satisfied about is what the audience will get is authentically me and authentically Gravity Forms, and that marriage of our cultures together. There's me through and through. And because of that, I'm that much more passionate about it. I'm that much more energized. I will work a Saturday like I did a couple of weeks ago to build a website in a day so that I could have an RSS feed, right? Like I will do that because this is as much me as it is Gravity Forms. And so that's what I'm most excited about with this, is being able to see that come to life and come to fruition.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
I meant to ask you this. I was going to ask you this after we signed off, but I'll just keep it rolling here. How are you planning, or how have you got guests? Because that's a whole different strategy as well. I know when people think about doing interviews, I meant to ask this earlier, but yeah, the other question is like, what's the strategy for getting guests? Do you have a certain strategy, or has it been more organic, or user base? What does that look like?
Yeah. So again, because we start from a position of planning, or I start from a position of planning, I already know the topic. So because I know the topic of every episode for the 23 episodes in our season, I already can, for me, that's really helpful in narrowing down the type of guest that I might go after. But it's different. So I had my episodes. I still have some blank spots. So if you are somebody who's in the agency space and you want to be on the show, you can go to welcometoinput.com and sign up. But the strategy has been start with my network, start with people I know. And I was really surprised about the kind of people that I knew. Like I had published authors in my network. I had radio broadcasters. I had TV hosts. I had agency executives. I had amazing freelance content creators in my network. And so I started there and then filled in all the slots I could. And then as we started doing interviews, all of a sudden my guests would start saying, oh, actually, I know so-and-so.
Yeah.
You should let me introduce you to them because they would be a great fit. And I think as I've shared the vision for what Input is with every guest as they come on, I always take a few minutes just to sort of talk about what the show's about. They've been really eager to introduce me to people. So that's how I got Stephen Christian, the lead singer of, Anne Berlin, to come on because he was a contact with another guest. And it was like, whoa. Like,
that just brought me back to high school, man. Anne Berlin. Wow.
Oh, tell me about it. Tell me about it. It was like, what? Like, this is from like my history. Like that they got me through my 20s kind of thing. But
that's funny.
It's so interesting, like how that's happened. So part of it is that, but my big challenge, and I think this is a challenge of the pandemic. This is a challenge of where the world is at right now, is that my personal network is not nearly as diverse as I wish it could be or is. And so the kinds of voices are the voices that rise to the top, or the voices that are the most likely to promote themselves or be promoted. And often they look and sound like me. And so for me, the biggest challenge has been trying to find voices from underrepresented groups and really make sure like we get lots of women involved and lots of people of color and people with different backgrounds and abilities to come in and tell their stories and be part of it. So that for me right now is the hunt. That's the hard part, is finding diverse voices to be on the show. The rest of it's fairly easy. Like I could fill it up with, white guys till the cows come home, but I want a show that's more representative of who we are as, a community of people and as a world. So,
yeah. Well, and the organic thing about all of that, no matter, what the diversity looks like once you get one guest, again, it's like the networking effect. They likely know a ton of other people. And then that's how you get opened up to so many amazing people. I know, was trying to think back. The way I got on the show, I didn't ask or request to be on the show. I talked to Gravity Forms about getting a special affiliate page done for my audience. And then I forget who I talked to was like, you know what? They were like, you have a really cool channel going on here. You should talk to James. He's doing a show for Gravity Forms, like a YouTube type show. And I was like, perfect, let's do it. So it is so interesting, the different ways you can get connected. But I think your point of having a more strategic approach for certain types of guests, whether it's story driven, and the reality is too, you don't want the same type of stories over and over, which can happen in the WordPress realm. So I think that's really cool. It's interesting. Let me look real quick at the schedule. Let's see. You will be, so just a few episodes before you, I had an entrepreneur who I think Walter was in his maybe 70s. So to have him on the show, and he is a guy of color, like a very different type of guest for my show. But wow, did he give some of the most amazing business advice for my audience as somebody who's gone through decades of entrepreneurship, which is really cool. So it is really cool to see, a whole different set of stories come to life. And the reality is everyone does have a different story. So even if there are similarities, I think the fact that you keep it real and you dive into those deep topics, that's when it gets less surfacey and more real. So, yeah, man. Well, I'm super pumped. Well, to avoid this becoming a 2-hour conversation, James, I know you're worn out. You're beat, understandably so, after a huge launch day, but I'm super pumped for input. We'll have all these links in the show notes. Thanks so much for your time today, man. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how this thing shapes up for you guys.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Awesome, James. Cheers, man.
Hey guys and gals, just wanted to pop in with a couple things before you head out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this podcast. I would love to hear your feedback, and it will also help other web designers find the show. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode. Just go to joshhall.co, click on podcasts, and search this episode number, and you'll find all the links, descriptions, and resources we talked about. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, and you'll be notified when the next episode is live. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode.